welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparin with you guys. Usual set of news for you all. Democratic and Republican mischievousness, along with some serious stories and some lighter stories. Casper, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I gotta be honest, I was a little tired of the super close-up shot of me when I was doing the show from home. So I decided to deal with the commute to come in here so you don't have a camera up my nose. So how you doing? How are you doing?
Pretty good, except for a camera up my nose.
Yes.
No, we've got some COVID situation at home, so doing the show from home here for a little while. But all right, lots of news. Let's do it. Let's get to it.
All right, well, we wanted to start off today with some news that happened over the weekend. Unfortunately, some terrifying news that luckily ended without any victims losing their lives. So let's talk about what happened in Texas. Members of a Texas synagogue were held hostage by a gunman over the weekend, and luckily none of those victims were injured or killed as a result of the hostage situation. However, the hostage taker was shot and killed, although the details surrounding his death are still a little murky since authorities are refusing to release too many details about it. But here's what we do know so far. The hostage situation lasted about 11 hours. The perpetrator here was a British national by the name of Malik Faisal Akram, and he held about 4 people hostage for 11 hours straight. But 6 hours into the hostage situation, he did release 1 hostage. Later, the remaining hostages were able to escape, and I'll give you the details on how they were able to do that. Now, these are the details that we know so far. The rabbi in this synagogue was the one who allowed the hostage taker in. He thought that he was actually doing something good, helping out a homeless individual. Rabbi Charlie Charlie Citron Walker said that he let the gunman inside the suburban Fort Worth synagogue Saturday because he appeared to need shelter. He said the man was not threatening or suspicious at first. In fact, he allowed him inside and then made him tea and had a conversation with him just to learn about his story. And in this video, the rabbi will explain when he realized that something was wrong. Let's take a quick look.
I took him in. I stayed with him. Making tea was an opportunity for me to talk with him. And in that moment, I didn't hear anything suspicious. In some of his story didn't quite add up, so I was a little bit curious, but that's not necessarily an uncommon thing. It was during prayer, while we were praying, and my back was turned. We face towards Jerusalem when we pray. Right before he revealed himself, but this was plenty of time in. I heard a click, and it could have been anything, and it turned out that it was his gun.
So we'll talk about how he obtained his gun and what the motive was in just a moment. But as I mentioned earlier, there were 4 total hostages. One of those hostages was released 6 hours into this 11-hour standoff. The other 3 managed to escape. Now, how did they escape? Remember, we're talking about a hostage taker who is armed with a handgun. The individuals at the synagogue were not armed for obvious reasons. And so how did they survive? Well, the rabbi explains in detail what happened next.
Hour or so of the standoff, he wasn't getting what he wanted. He was getting, it didn't look good. It didn't sound good. We were terrified. And when I saw an opportunity where he wasn't in a good position, I made sure that the 2 gentlemen who were still with me, that they were ready to go. The exit wasn't too far away. I told them to go. I threw a chair at the gunman, and I headed for the door. And all 3 of us were able to get out without even a shot being fired.
Which really is incredible. And him throwing the chair was part of the survival training that he had received previously. And luckily it did work. None of the hostages were harmed or no one died as a result of that. As I mentioned, the perpetrator was shot and killed later after the hostages were freed. Now, just to give you some more details on this, another man held hostage by the name of Jeffrey Cohen said that the men worked to keep the gunman engaged. They talked to the gunman and he lectured them. At one point, as the situation devolved, Cohen said the gunman told them to get on their knees. Cohen recalled rearing up in his chair and slowly moving his head and mouthing no. As the gunman moved to sit down, Cohen said that the rabbi yelled to run. Okay, now again, who is this hostage taker? Here's what we know about him so far. Authorities have identified him as 44-year-old British national Malik Faisal Akram, who was killed Saturday night after the last 3 hostages ran out of the synagogue in Colleyville around 9 p.m. The first hostage, again, was released shortly after 5 p.m. Again, authorities, for some reason, are refusing to explain who or how Akram got shot. The FBI also on Sunday night issued a statement calling the ordeal a terrorism-related matter in which the Jewish community was targeted and said the Joint Terrorism Task Force is investigating. The agency noted that Akram spoke repeatedly during negotiations about a prisoner who is serving an 86-year sentence in the United States. The statement followed comments from the special agent in charge of the FBI's Dallas field office that the hostage taker was focused on an issue not specifically related to the Jewish community. However, I do want to add a caveat to that because we're also learning that the reason why he targeted this particular synagogue could be due to its close proximity to the prison where the individual that he wants freed is currently being jailed or imprisoned. And he was also talking about how he believes that the Jews control everything and that they might have a line of communication to Biden who might free the very individual that he wants freed from detention. And so I'll give you more details on the individual that he wanted freed in just a moment. But Cenk, I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in.
The concept of the Young Turks means the audience, they are the Young Turks. They are the go-getters. They are the ones making the emphatic change happen in their local community. The reality is that we've always, young and the not so young, we've always cared about news. But when you do not see the messengers of the news look like you, when they do not share your experiences, exposures, and environment, and there's a disconnect between you and the news. I lecture in mass communications. One thing I tell all of my students, there is no such thing as non-biased news. It never has been. Non-biased news has always been an illusion. Let's go back to the 60s and 70s, where people would say that was the purity of non-biased news. News has a segment. That segment has a time. That time, you must do your story and be finished. That means the producer, the writer, the orator has to take out what they don't think is important and only leave in what they believe is important. They have a limited time to tell the story. They do not have time to tell everybody's version or everybody's side. And they get to choose the facts that they bring to you, as well as the nuance, which really is a word for opinion, that they bring to you, the context they bring to you. So we've always had a level of bias in news. Here's the issue. The issue is to not deceive individuals as if you don't have some level of opinion with your news commentary. And that's what TYT has never done. They've always been authentic in their approach to progressive ideology and their news analysis and political breakdown. And I think that's how you actually win the heart and soul of individuals who are consuming information from you, because now they see themselves in you.
We'll get to Texas gun laws in a second, which is a huge culprit here. But first, on these issues, the rabbi is a hero in a couple of different ways. Not just in the escape, not just that he was proactive before there was any situation and got tips from the Anti-Defamation League, FBI, et cetera, on how to, protect yourself in a situation like this. But also, yes, it led in the wrong direction. But for him to open his door to someone he thought was in need that was not Jewish, and to serve him tea, etc., was both incredibly humanitarian and wonderful of him. But also might have saved their lives. He might have hesitated in pulling the trigger as they were running away because he had a human conversation with these folks. So I just can't thank the rabbi enough for just being an absolute hero in this situation. And now we've been warning about the attacks on synagogues for a long time. This one does not fit the normal pattern. Lately, the attacks on synagogues have been almost exclusively right wing. But in this case, it looks like it's basically a Muslim terrorist. And I was gonna say, Anna, because I had not seen his comments about how the Jews run the world. I was gonna say, I would be shocked if this was a coincidence. No, usually if somebody goes into a synagogue, they went into a synagogue for a purpose. It is almost never random, right? And so, is this terrorism? Of course it is. It's the textbook definition of terrorism. It is someone with a political point and trying to get a very specific, tangible political objective, which is the release of this other terrorist, right? So I have no problem with how this one is classified. I am deeply frustrated that right wingers here in America will do almost an identical thing, and they will not be called terrorists. So, but the minute that it's a Muslim, we're like, well, it's over. That's obviously terrorism. I don't mind that. In this case, it definitely is, right? But can we get any kind of parity when it's a white right winger? Or do we have to just constantly treat them with kid gloves? I mean, January 6th, the Tucker Carlson nearly took Ted Cruz's head off for saying the word terrorism about it. And no right winger will ever say that it was terrorism. It was violence for a very specific political objective. It's nearly the definition of terrorism. The only reason they say it isn't is because they say, well, I mean, they're not Muslims, so can it really be terrorism? Okay, then you misunderstand the word, you misuse it on purpose, and I'm tired of that bigotry too.
Right, I mean, so many examples come to mind, whether it be Dylan Roof and what he did, or what happened at a Texas Walmart where a gunman killed dozens of people due to his anti-immigrant political beliefs. We've seen case after case, and you're right, there is a double standard, not only in the way that the perpetrators are labeled, but in the way the media labels the perpetrators. So I think that's definitely a valid point. I do want to also talk about the political motivations of the perpetrator in this case, because as I mentioned, he wanted to ensure the release of someone who's serving 86 years in prison for her terrorist-related convictions. So Akram could be heard ranting on a Facebook live stream of the services and demanding the release of Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani neuroscientist suspected of having ties to Al-Qaeda, who was convicted of trying to kill US Army officers in Afghanistan. And so he wanted her to be released. And it's interesting because some reports indicate that he did not have any type of criminal record, that there was no reason for him to be on any type of terrorist watch list. However, he has had some pretty serious run-ins with the law. For instance, in the UK, for instance, in September of 2001, he was banned from Blackburn's Magistrates Court for threatening staff on a number of occasions, including on days when he was not even due in court. His final threat was made on September 12th of 2001 when he said he wished that a court usher had been killed in the previous day's 9/11 terrorist attacks. His family claims that he's suffering from severe mental health issues, but there was a considerable amount of premeditation. Think about it. He came to the United States 2 weeks prior to carrying out this hostage situation. He was able to purchase a handgun. We don't know the exact details. Right now, authorities are floating the notion that he was able to purchase a handgun in Texas through a private sale. So that has not been confirmed. I just want to make sure you guys know that, but that is what the authorities are thinking as of now. And as we learn more details, of course, we'll either confirm or give you any update to that. But He clearly had a motive here. There was premeditation. If you ask me, that's my opinion. And given the fact that it's so easy to purchase firearms privately without having to worry about any type of background check, I mean, it's just a perfect recipe for this kind of situation. And luckily, none of the hostages were harmed.
Yeah, so Anna, you had really good examples of white right-wing terrorists who are labeled mass shooters. That's not a pleasant title either, but it's not terrorist. And in fact, nobody even thinks to call them terrorists. It doesn't occur to them when they write political manifestos. But I actually have the perfect example. There was another guy from Britain who actually tried to kill Trump. Like, nobody remembers this. It got very little coverage. And it's kind of weird that, somebody would try to do an assassination of Trump and you'd barely ever hear about it, right? Now, that British guy was not Muslim. He was a young white guy. And everybody instantly said, oh, mental health, etc. Now, look, this Muslim guy also has massive mental health issues. And his family said they can't believe that the authorities had not contained him better because of his previous threats. That's his family saying it. And they say that he had been in mental health institutions, etc. Generally, stable people don't turn into terrorists. So, but there was a white British guy and a Muslim British guy. And the treatment was so disparate. The other guy was not at all called a terrorist, even though he clearly was a political reason to try to assassinate the president. And the coverage was nearly non-existent. It's just amazing the stereotypes that are in the reporters' heads, media's heads, politicians' heads, and we all take it for granted. Now, the other thing that's important here is, a lot of right-wing talking points. Oh my God, the terrorists are going to come in through the borders. The guy flew in on a plane. So why would he have to bother trying to cross the Rio Grande and try to enter illegally? You just get a tourist visa and fly in. So all that scaremongering about immigration is, in that regard, is total nonsense, okay? Now, finally, the gun laws. Look, here I'll quote Vice. Just last year, the state passed a law allowing firearm owners to carry a handgun without a license or training, okay? So, well, of course, this guy flew into America knowing that, oh, you don't need to bring a gun. You don't need to bring any weapons. You don't need to bring the weapons on the plane. The minute you land in America, you can get a weapon super easy anytime you want. The government won't even bother checking in on you as long as it's a private sale, whether that's done on the street or in a flea market. You can buy any weapon you want and then go kill them. Americans are so stupid. They let terrorists buy weapons. They let everybody buy weapons. If he had to get a license and he had to go through training, he very, very likely would have gotten caught. But Texas thinks that anarchy is great for law and order? Of course not. So this terrorist brought to you by the loose regulations of Republicans in Texas.
Yeah, and that further loosening of gun regulations in Texas was 100% politically motivated because of the fact that the current governor, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, is fearful about getting primaried by Republicans who are even further to the right. So beginning last year, he really started pushing for pretty extreme right-wing policies, including, I hate that it's even considered a right-wing policy, but just loosening up gun laws in a state where gun laws were already virtually non-existent. So it has some pretty serious consequences. But there's one other thing I wanted to bring up, Cenk, before we wrap this story up, because this story is likely to further develop. There's still stuff that we don't know about, including this international investigation that's taking place now. So the investigation has now stretched to England, where police in Manchester announced that 2 teenagers were in custody in connection with the standoff. Greater Manchester Police tweeted that counterterrorism officers had made the arrest, but did not say whether the pair faced any charges. I haven't been able to find any other details about that part of the story, and so that could be something that develops in the coming days. But luckily, again, I just want to repeat, that rabbi is just such an incredibly brave and, of course, as Cenk mentioned, kind person. Really, really happy that no one, not a single one of the hostages was physically harmed. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of trauma that comes along with that kind of attack. And synagogues across the country now have beefed up security as a result, and I definitely don't blame them for that.
No, synagogues should be super careful, whether it's right wingers, Muslims, it doesn't matter. Like, these are dangerous times. Make sure you're safe. All right, the last note here. The British man who tried to assassinate Donald Trump is Michael Sanford. You could look it up. He got a 1-year sentence and was released from prison in 5 months and is now back in the UK.
That's crazy.
Well, it's okay, he's white, he's Christian. They say, oh, he had mental health issues. Of course he did, of course he did. And this guy who tried to take over the synagogue clearly has mental health issues. They should be treated the same, but that there's no hope of that in America. If you're Muslim, they're gonna throw the book at you. In this case, it is well merited, right? But if you're white, do anything you like. Who cares? You'll be out. You're trying to assassinate the president? You'll be out in 5 months.
Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how the top frenemies in the country, Donald Trump and Ron Desantis, have this feud that continues to heat up. We've got those details and more when we come back.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for like, political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning. Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say, you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. We got a lot more news for you guys. Let's get started.
The ongoing feud between former President Donald Trump and Florida Governor Ron Desantis is heating up. Now it turns out that Desantis is starting to test the waters in being a little critical of Trump's response to COVID, which we'll get to in just a second. But before I get to those details, let's discuss the continuation of Trump just insulting Ron DeSantis, in some cases openly, in other cases behind the scenes while talking to those close to him. Now, The Hill published a piece today arguing that Trump has griped behind the scenes for months about DeSantis's rapid political rise, including chatter about a future White House bid. But the complaints from the former president have only gotten louder or grown louder, which isn't surprising when you consider a story that we covered recently where he was talking about Republicans who do something that gets under his skin. And this was immediately after Ron DeSantis did exactly what he describes in this clip.
Do you reconsider your push for it, or what's your view now on the vaccine in general?
Well, I've taken it. I've had the booster. Many politicians, I watched a couple of politicians be interviewed, and one of the questions was, did you get the booster? Because they had the vaccine. And they're answering it like, in other words, the answer is yes, but they don't want to say it. Because they're gutless. You got to say it. Whether you had it or not, say it. But the fact is that I think the vaccine has saved tens of millions of people throughout the world. I have had absolutely no side effects. I've had it like other people have had it, nothing special.
Now, that was a statement that Trump made about gutless Republicans immediately after Ron DeSantis had an interview with Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business, where he refused to answer whether or not he had gotten the booster shot. So it was clear who he was talking about. Now, there are some former Trump advisors who are actually befuddled at the fact that Trump is being critical of Ron DeSantis and is engaging in this feud. In fact, Sam Nunberg is one of those former Trump advisors, and he told The Hill, quote, "President Trump is the one clearly picking the fight here, and it's a fight that's too early and unnecessary. We're not in Republican primary season. This is a fight for mid-2023. It's not a fight to start having in 2022. And then this is my favorite part of Nunberg's quote. He says, if Donald Trump believes he is punching down when he's attacking Ron DeSantis, then why do it? Meaning, clearly Trump sees DeSantis and the fact that he is a rising star within the Republican Party as a major threat to his chances of winning the presidential bid in 2024, or at least the Republican primary in 2024. Now, what is Trump irritated about? As we know, Trump doesn't like anyone outshining him, so that's definitely part of it. But he's also mad that DeSantis is not showing him deference because he genuinely believes that he's the one who made DeSantis's political career. Trump is the one who endorsed DeSantis as he was running for governor in Florida. And remember, that gubernatorial race was a close one, and Trump supporting him could have made all the difference. He's also annoyed that DeSantis won't say whether or not he plans to run for president in 2024. So he wants DeSantis to say either no, absolutely not, or yes, I'm definitely considering it. And DeSantis is doing what most politicians do, especially at this stage in the election cycle, if you can call it that. They usually play coy until there's about a year out until the election takes place. So before I get to DeSantis's statements about Trump, Cenk, I wanted to get your thoughts on what Trump has been saying about him.
Here, I'll summarize it with this. Trump is basically saying, "Meow."
Exactly, 100%. And honestly, I'm here for it, but I have a prediction that I think some people might disagree with, but continue.
Yeah, so look, this is the most predictable thing in the world. In fact, we predicted it. We told you that eventually Trump would fight DeSantis if DeSantis didn't bend a knee. And so far he hasn't. So of course Trump is gonna catch feelings. This is, 7th grade recess, and he's gonna snipe behind the scenes. He can't help himself. He's got diarrhea of the mouth, so that anytime anybody comes by, he's like, DeSantis, he hasn't kissed my whatever yet, right? Ring, let's call it ring. And just to be fair to Trump, DeSantis did rise up being mini-me. So it's like mini-me turning against Dr. Evil or Jabba the Hutt or whatever he is. So it's entirely predictable as we told you would certainly happen, and here it is. And it has everything to do with Trump's ego. But the most relevant part of the story, Anna, is that DeSantis is not backing down. So we might have an actual primary, in which case there will be blood politically. Republicans ain't Democrats. They will tear each other to pieces.
That's exactly right. And in regard to DeSantis fighting back, I just want to be clear that he's just kind of like dipping his toe in the water for now, right? A little dippy dip. So what did he say? Well, recently he was on some conservative podcast and he talked about Trump's response to COVID. And remember, DeSantis is really trying to stand out as this anti-mask mandates, anti-vaccine mandates, anti-shutdown kind of guy, as if he's real different from everyone else in the Republican Party. But he did try to draw like this minor distinction between himself and Trump. He said this, in a recent interview with the conservative Ruthless podcast, DeSantis said that he regretted not pushing back more aggressively when Trump advised Americans to stay home in the early days of the coronavirus pandemic. He also said, quote, I was probably the first governor in January of 2020 to call for travel restrictions from China. I supported Trump when he did that, but we have to take a step back and acknowledge that those travel restrictions just didn't work. So again, I don't really see that as the same as Trump calling DeSantis gutless. I think that Ron DeSantis, much like other Republican politicians, much like all other politicians, is a little more careful, possibly a little more strategic before ultimately engaging in this full-blown feud. But I think once the two of them are on a debate stage during the GOP primaries, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters how strategic Ron DeSantis is. Trump just has this way about him. He has this way of making all of the other political opponents look like clowns. I mean, he did it with every other GOP contender during the 2016 Republican primaries. I don't see how it would be any different with Ron DeSantis, regardless of how much his constituents like him at this moment. It's the childish bullying and name calling that somehow is very effective with Republican voters.
Yeah, Anna, I hear you on that. But I think things just got a little interesting because previously I would have said there's nobody has any chance of beating Trump. But now there's two vulnerabilities that Trump has. It's not showing up in the polling yet. Let's be clear. He's still dominant as we speak. Within the Republican Party. But one is, we've been telling you over the last couple of weeks, the Republicans have made a turn. The donors have for the Republican Party. It's very clear because they got their most loyal politicians, and then we predicted they would get their most loyal media figures to start turning on Donald Trump. And that's exactly what's happened. And in fact, Laura Ingraham just came out and said she might not vote for Donald Trump in 2024. So just again, as we predicted, the donors behind the scenes, the oligarchs, are pushing the Republican Party to actually fight back against Trump. And they themselves don't necessarily, only a couple of votes, but their money speaks volumes.
Does it though? And
it influences.
Does it? Did it speak volumes in 2016? The media was against him in 2016. The donors were against him in 2016. They didn't want him. They saw him as a buffoon. They saw him as like someone who wasn't good for the country. I mean, and then that was followed with 4 years of negative media coverage. Like, I just don't believe that that's enough to kind of overwhelm, honestly, as much as I hate to say it, the characteristics of Trump that do end up playing well with the Republican electorate. Let's keep it real. He's entertaining and he's funny. And once he decides that he's gonna go all in on insulting any political opponent, he goes all in and he persuades the base to follow him through. So I don't know, we'll see. That's just my prediction. I could be completely wrong about that. But Trump is one of those, I don't know. He's just one of those cases where the typical conventional wisdom doesn't really apply the same way that it does with other politicians.
Yeah, look, Anna, so there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but let's break down why, right? So he won because he's a populist. Now we know that he's a fake populist, but he's plain spoken in that sense, and that really resonated. Democrats, meanwhile, think if you haven't gone to Harvard through and gotten 3 different doctorates and speak like an ass that no one understands, that you can't win elections. So it's really easy to beat the Democrats. Almost anybody could beat them. And so, but the media gave Trump billions of dollars in free coverage. They might have thought he was a buffoon, but they thought he was such a buffoon. They're like, it's okay, let's give him free billions in media coverage.
They'll do the same.
No, they'll do the same. But Anna, that leads me to my second point. Look, first, just to finish up the first point real quick, the donors themselves, if they're funneling the money through Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, then you're right, they don't matter at all because those guys couldn't win anything. They're just obvious corporate donor robots, and good on the Republican primary voters to figure that out, okay? Now, unfortunately, they went in the wrong direction with Trump, but when they get the Laura Ingrams and the Brian Kilmeades and other influencers in right-wing media, then that could have a difference. And so that money is huge and it will talk for the next couple of years to take Trump down. Now, why it won't work this way? Well, it's because Ron DeSantis is trying to out-populist them. He's saying this, I can't believe Trump asked for a shutdown. That's outrageous. He should have never asked for a shutdown. I'm even more populist than him. I would have killed you quicker than he did. So in the Republican circles, yeah, that might work.
Yeah, and just to give you a few more quotes from Republican insiders, one of whom decided to share his name with the Hill. This is Ford O'Connell, a GOP strategist. He says, quote, "What Ron DeSantis has done is he's taken Donald Trump's America First playbook and crafted it as a Florida First playbook. If you had told me that Ron DeSantis would display more political courage than Greg Abbott," that's the Texas governor, of course, "I wouldn't have believed it. The idea that DeSantis gave all the other Republicans a backbone and cover to do what's best for their states is why conservatives are now rewarding him." And one GOP consultant, a different individual who did not give the Hill his or her name, said, quote, "I think he's a little more polished." And I've heard this comment several times, right? That Ron DeSantis is like Donald Trump without the baggage. He's got the Harvard credentials. He served in the military. He's the governor of the third largest state, but he can still speak the language of the MAGA crowd. That part I'm not so sure about. He continues to say, or she continues to say, with Trump, there's still a lot of drama. So I think it probably worries him that there's this other guy who's getting a lot of attention. And I agree with a lot in that statement. The baggage statement is something that I've heard not from other GOP strategists, but from other Trump supporters who go to Trump rallies and talk to the press while at the Trump rallies. And so I'm curious to see how it all plays out. I think that it is feasible that someone like DeSantis could, win in the GOP primaries during this presidential bid. We'll see, but in the meantime, at least we get to enjoy this feud because Trump does not like anyone outshining him. And it's definitely amusing. It's like this frenemies situation that's kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, so last two things here. Republican voters, yes, they're in love with Trump, but why? Because he takes on the establishment, he takes on the libs, and he owns the libs, and he's the most anti-establishment politician, right? But if they perceive him as pro-vaccine, and the right-wing media told them for over a year now that the vaccine is the boogeyman and it is run by the Jews and the space lasers and the microchips, and Trump says take the vaccine, and DeSantis said, by the way, DeSantis definitely took the vaccine and the booster. When asked about it, he said, well, I don't talk about the things I might have taken. Okay, all right, you definitely took it, okay? But if he says no, vaccine is for weak men, then they'll flock to him. They'll flock to whichever is the most anti-establishment side. But final point is to go back to what Anna was saying. If they actually run against each other, this will definitely be decided in the debates. So one of our members just wrote in, Approval, said if Trump and DeSantis are in a primary debate and Trump ordered him to leave the stage or something demeaning like that, DeSantis would. And so that will decide it, guys. If Trump bullies DeSantis, and DeSantis can effectively stand up to him, then we got a contest. If Trump bullies DeSantis and DeSantis bows his head, it's over, it's gonna be Trump.
I wanna take a bet because I think DeSantis would bow his head, but I could be wrong, we'll see.
No, by the way, I'm not betting. I have no idea which way DeSantis is gonna go. Could he be a total coward and then bend down and lick Trump's boots? Of course, that's how he started his career. So that's still very likely.
Yep.
Just the jury's out for now.
Well, we've got some critique for the Democratic Party as well when we come back from the break. We'll give you a statement from a longtime Democratic aide who thinks, hey, if you're frustrated with the Biden administration, it's not a leadership problem, it's a you problem. We'll give you those details and more when we come back.
You are the media revolution. You are much needed.
TYT, TYT. The place is like 95% TYT on.
You guys, the Young Turks, which is my favorite channel, we're getting that message out.
Tank and the Young Turks do an extraordinarily good job.
No matter what mainstream media says, you have to listen to the Young Turks.
All the people who support us on the internet, that's what gives us strength. That's what allows anyone who was in there who was undecided to think one side seems to be winning, they seem to have a bigger army. There might be a reason for that. So thank you guys.
Across the map are going to be so tight and so close that it is likely going to be very difficult to call this on election night.
The twin forces behind the Biden candidacy, the billionaires
and the Bolsheviks. Arizona, 19 million. For the vice president, 9 million, a little over 9 million for President Trump.
We are desperate for Donald Trump to not be president anymore because he's fascist and is a threat to our democracy. And we said that from day one. Yes, we want Biden to beat Trump. Is that clear enough?
It is increasingly difficult for the American public to get any sort of truth.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
People still don't know what the word feminist actually means. Not even that. People are still angered by the word.
People think feminist is a bad word, but it's not.
There are gradations, there are different waves. The people who are against gender equality love to use like militant feminists as the representatives of all feminists. It's untrue.
I don't know why you'd be threatened by strong women unless you were an incredibly weak man. If you don't have equal rights, or you're not treated the same way, well, wouldn't you be angry?
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. A lot more news. Let's do it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a conversation that took place on cable news that definitely got under my skin. So, if you're frustrated with the lack of leadership from the Biden administration, there is a former Democratic aide who has some news for you. It's really not a Biden problem. It's not a Democratic leadership problem. It's a you problem. Here's Paul Begala explaining what he means.
The words of the daughter-in-law of Martin Luther King Jr., Andrea Waters King. This is what she told Politico, quote, "What we have seen with President Biden is what happens when he puts the full force and power behind an issue like infrastructure. What we want to see is that same power and passion being put behind voting rights." Do you think that's fair criticism? Did President Biden put more effort into getting infrastructure passed, for example?
Well, he got infrastructure passed, and that's a good thing because success can breed success. He is putting the full force of the presidency behind it. I think the problem for the Democrats right now is not that they have bad leaders. They have bad followers.
Now, when I heard that statement, I was under the assumption that Paul Begala was talking about other Democratic lawmakers, those who are not in positions of leadership, individuals like Senator Joe Manchin or Senator Kyrsten Sinema. They're Democratic senators who have stood in the way of the passage of various elements of Biden's agenda, including $15 minimum wage, the social spending package, otherwise known as Build Back Better. But no, that is not what Paul Begala is talking about. He's talking about people like us. Let's watch what he means.
I read the most amazing essay today from Andy Young. Andy is former mayor of Atlanta, former UN ambassador, and more importantly, probably the closest confidant and aide to Dr. King. He told this story. December of 1964, Andy Young and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. go to see Lyndon Johnson to push him for a Voting Rights Act. Johnson says, "I can't do it. I used all my power to get the Civil Rights Act done last year. I don't have the power to push Congress any further on voting rights." As they left the White House, Andy Young's words, he said, I asked Dr. King what he thought. He said, "I think we got to go get the president some power." And so you know what they did? They organized, these are Andy Young's words, we mobilized the churches, the universities, the labor unions, the business community, a coalition of people of goodwill. In other words, those of us who want to save voting rights, we need to get to work. I do think Biden is putting everything behind this, but he needs better followers, so he needs all of us in the game as well.
Cenk, there's so much to unpack from the statement that we just heard. But I do want to remind you all of the fact that the very people who put in the work, they engaged in the ground game in Georgia to get the 2 Democratic senators elected in the senatorial runoff races. They worked really, really hard to ensure that they would get out the vote to get Biden elected in Georgia. Those very people, okay, those organizers, those activists, they're the ones who boycotted Biden's speech in Atlanta in regard to voting rights because they felt that Biden had neglected the issue that they had worked so hard to rally support for. And you know what happened immediately after that? Simone Sanders, who was working for Kamala Harris up until very recently, now she's working at cable news, she's got a hosting gig there. she totally minimized those very activists, those very individuals who put in the work to ensure that Democrats held all the levers of power in Congress, in the executive branch. I mean, the notion that the organizers, that the activists are the ones to blame here, that they haven't done enough, is just ridiculous and enables the pathetic weakness that we've seen from the Biden administration. And no, I'm not buying for a second that Biden has done everything he could possibly do to ensure the passage of a voting rights bill or the passage of his own social spending bill. He has not, and I'll make my case in just a minute, but before I get into that rant, Cenk, jump in.
Yeah. So look, these statements by Begala are deeply offensive, deeply misleading, and deeply stupid. So let me break down exactly why on every one of those counts. First of all, understand who he's attacking. He's attacking those exact civil rights leaders that Anna mentioned, the ones that sat out the Biden speech. He's basically telling them, remember, MLK worked with Lyndon Johnson and got him more votes, so you better know your role. Shut up, civil rights leaders, he's saying, and go and just get us more votes like we told you to. It is incredibly offensive. It's sick.
Yep.
And by the way, think about the hypocrisy here. When they got the same African-American votes in Democratic primaries at the presidential level in South Carolina and the South, they would say, progressives, you better not complain. Those are black voters. You better not insult them. Now they're saying, oh, we don't have to give you voting rights. No black voters, black faith leaders, black civil rights leaders. You're the problem, Begala says. Oh my God, that's so hypocritical. Now all of a sudden, apparently it's fair game to attack black voters and black leaders. They're the world's largest hypocrites. Now, why is it misleading? Are you kidding me? Have you read any history? Begala's not that stupid. Come on.
Right.
You don't know that Martin Luther King kicked Lyndon Johnson's ass up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, that Lyndon Johnson was scared to death of Martin Luther King, and how he's going to either rally people for him or against him. You never read that Martin Luther King threatened Lyndon Johnson politically?
No, but
he was tough as nails against Lyndon Johnson. Tough as nails. Now to pretend that MLK was soft and all he did was serve Johnson.
Right.
That is so misleading and incredibly offensive.
You are the media revolution. You are much needed.
TYT, TYT.
The place is like 95% TYT army.
You guys, the Young Turks, which is my favorite channel, we're getting that message out.
Cenk and the Young Turks do an extraordinarily good job.
No matter what mainstream media says, you have to listen to the Young Turks.
All the people who support us on the internet, that's what gives us strength. That's what allows anyone who was in there who was undecided to think one side seems to be winning, they seem to have a bigger army. There might be a reason for that. So thank you guys.
Across the map are going to be so tight and so close that it is likely going to be very difficult to call this on election night.
The twin forces behind the Biden candidacy, the billionaires and the Bolsheviks.
Arizona, 19 million. For the vice president, 9 million, a little over 9 million for President Trump.
We are desperate for Donald Trump to not be president anymore because he's fascist and is a threat to our democracy. And we said that from day one. Yes, we want Biden to beat Trump. Is that clear enough?
It is increasingly difficult for the American public to get any sort of truth.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
People still don't know what the word feminist actually means. Not even that. People are still angered by the word.
People think feminist is a bad word, but it's not.
There are gradations, there are different ways. The people who are against gender equality love to use like militant feminists as the representatives of all feminists. It's untrue.
I don't know why you'd be threatened by strong women unless you were an incredibly weak man. If you don't have equal rights, or you're not treated the same way, well, wouldn't you be angry?
The other thing I want to add is to compare Biden to LBJ is the most laughable thing. I think probably one of the dumbest things I've heard on cable news. LBJ and Biden are not the same in any way, shape, or form. They're very different. You know why? Because LBJ was willing to use carrots, which Biden is definitely willing to use, and sticks. LBJ was honestly like ready and willing to intimidate members of his own party, even go so far as to coerce them to ensure the passage of the civil rights bill, okay? LBJ was not some friendly, nice, like Roger, what's the name of that guy? Mr. Rogers type of guy, okay? He was willing to use punishment against members of his own party if they were unwilling to play ball. That is not the case with Biden, and I want to give you specific examples. I know that I've talked about this before, but I want to get more specific about what I mean. So remember, I talk about how Joe Manchin and his family gets all sorts of favors from the Biden administration, even as Senator Manchin serves as a massive obstacle in the passage of Biden's alleged agenda. I say alleged because at this point, I don't even know if Biden really cares about his own agenda or really cared about the passage of his own agenda. But here is a headline from the Associated Press. This is March 26th of 2021. Biden taps Senator Manchin's wife to co-chair Appellation Board. Okay, so this is a position that Manchin's wife desperately wanted. She was tapped for that position. Biden gave it to her. And was this something that happened before or after Manchin was already serving as an obstacle? Well, let's read from the body of that piece. President Joe Biden is nominating Gail Manchin, the wife of West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, to be the co-chair of the Appalachian Regional Commission, an economic development partnership involving the federal government and 13 states. Oh, how nice. In the same article, it says, Joe Manchin is a critical part of the slim Democratic majority in the Senate, influencing what parts of Biden's agenda can be passed. He has come out against a $15 an hour minimum wage and ending the filibuster. So Manchin was already on the record letting Biden know, I am going to stand in the way of your agenda. And what did Biden do? Oh, let me reward you by giving your wife the job that she wants. Okay, how nice. What kind of sticks were implemented here? You know, what kind of political punishment took place? If Biden really wanted the passage of a voting rights bill, did he implement anything that would actually apply real pressure to either Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema? Of course not. In fact, he continued to be incredibly complimentary toward both of them. He had said about Manchin, this is in October of 2021, not too long ago, a few months ago. The president said Manchin was, quote, not a bad guy, not a bad guy. This is October of 2021, but if that doesn't infuriate you, here's a statement from Joe Biden during an October town hall on CNN. Let's watch.
A lot of Democrats in the House and Senate who are confused about where Senator Sinema actually stands on things. And I know she's been negotiating directly with you and the White House. What is your read on her? And obviously you need her to remain positive in your direction, so I don't know what you're going to say, but what is your read on her? Do you know where she stands?
First of all, she's smart as the devil, number one. Number two, she's very supportive of the environmental agenda in my legislation. Very supportive. She's supportive of almost all the things I mentioned relating to everything from a family care to all those issues.
Oh, is she? Why is he doing positive PR for Sinema? Why are you saying that she's supportive of the environmental agenda when she's standing in the way of the passage of your environmental agenda? Why are you doing positive PR for her? This is October of 2021. This wasn't at the very beginning of the Biden presidency. This isn't, this is after months and months of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin standing in the way of important legislation passing in the Senate. But no, do positive PR for her, paint her as this warrior for climate action, when in reality, she has only served as an obstacle. It's ridiculous. Biden is a joke. Come on, guys. I know our audience is on board. They know they're not stupid. But the blue checkmark Democrats on Twitter are completely delusional about the weakness that we're seeing from the Biden administration right now. Go ahead and tweet me. Go ahead and cry about it. Get all the K-Hive people to whine about it. You know it's the truth. They've completely abandoned the very people who did the groundwork necessary to get him elected. That's just the fact of the matter, period.
There's two layers here. One is Biden is pathetically weak, and anyone who's objective would see that. We want his agenda. We're trying to pass his so-called agenda. We're trying to help. We actually want you to pass things. But this whole all carrots, no sticks, it's useless. It's, I'll give you everything, Joe. You send him, I'll kiss your ass. Manchin, I'll kiss your ass. I'll grovel to you. Is it working? Is it working? No. All they ever do is slap you across the face. And all you say, Biden, is thank you, sir, may I have another? And then whenever they're pressed on being weak, they're like, well, Joe Manchin is my lover, so I'm never, Joe Manchin. He's never criticized Joe Manchin. You don't know politics, that it's carrots and sticks? No. Joe Biden is Joe Manchin. He's just using him. He doesn't believe in any of his so-called agenda. But now, okay, but we knew all that. This turn by Begala, and now, by the way, this is a talking point you will see going forward. You will see corporate Democrats, establishment Democrats, blaming the voters over and over again. They haven't even lost yet, and they're already blaming you guys. So Begala is now saying, no, it's not Biden's fault. It's your fault. You, the Democratic voters, who we have so much disdain for, now will yell at you and say, how dare you question us? Of course we didn't pass anything. That's because it's your fault. You should have given us a bigger majority. Well, we gave you a bigger majority under Obama. You had a super majority. What'd you do with it? You passed Romney Care. You didn't do anything on minimum wage, on any of the economic issues. Why? Because you're corrupt. And now you've got people parroting these talking points. Oh, it's the voters' fault. Oh, yeah. Let's attack our own voters. So that leads me to why it's deeply stupid. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're a moderate Democrat and you think, oh yeah, I hate our own voters. If our own voters were more subservient and just groveled at Biden's feet and threw carrots at Manchin, oh my God, then we would win. If we just kiss more Democratic ass, we would win. Okay, I don't care if you're in that camp. You're wrong, you're foolish. It's all right, you're allowed to have your opinion, okay? But you're missing it. It's not going to work. You think insulting your own voters is gonna motivate them to show up and vote for you? You're nuts. You live in a bubble of elites and establishment where you think, oh yeah, man, just kick the voter and they'll do it. Just serve the donors, give them everything you want and spit on the voters. I've never heard a dumber political strategy in my life. You can guarantee, if they continue down this path, guaranteed that they will get routed in 22 and annihilated in 24. I've never seen anything so dumb in my life.
Well, you're forgetting one other part of their political strategy is to fearmonger about how the Republican Party is destroying democracy. You know, the very Republican Party that they did nothing about when they were in a position of power to do something about. So congratulations, that is a losing strategy. We're already seeing that play out in the polls. Look, Democratic primaries really matter. And we need to get rid of the corporate Democrats. They're losers, and the reason why they're losers is because they're beholden to corporate interests. They always have been, they always will be, and the party will continue to get worse unless we get real active in the primaries to ensure that we get actual progressives, elected rather than these corporate Democrats who take corporate PAC money.
One last thing, Anna. So they're gonna run on Republicans are destroying democracy. I agree, that is what Republicans are trying to do. But then you're gonna say, I'm not gonna pass voting rights, the bare minimum that I promised everybody. I'm not gonna do anything about it, but I want you to vote for me to protect you from Republicans destroying democracy. Well, that's what I did last time. And then you laid down like a doormat for them because your donors told you to be a bitch and so don't pass anything. We want the status quo. And Biden says, yes, sir, yes, sir. Let me see you fight Manchin. Let me see you fight Sinema. You'll never do it, Biden, because you're corrupt. You're just like them. You're never gonna fight for your voters. All you're gonna do is send out Begala and a bunch of other people to go yell at your voters and say it's your fault. The elites are great. Good luck with that message. You're gonna get slaughtered politically.
All right, when we come back for the second hour, we'll talk about how books are literally being banned from school libraries across the country because conservatives don't want any student to be able to read them. By the way, not required books, not assigned books, just books that they're banning at school libraries across the country. And then later, we'll also talk about some of the scarier lies coming from Donald Trump in regard to coronavirus treatment and vaccines. We've got all of that coming up when we come back for the second hour. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You are the media revolution. You are much needed.
TYT, TYT.
The place is like 95% TYT on.
You guys, the Young Turks, which is my favorite channel, we're getting that message out.
Cenk and the Young Turks do an extraordinarily good job.
No matter what mainstream media says, you have to listen to the Young Turks.
The people who support us on the internet, that's what gives us strength. That's what allows anyone who was in there who was undecided to think one side seems to be winning, they seem to have a bigger army. There might be a reason for that. So thank you guys.
Across the map are going to be so tight and so close that it is likely going to be very difficult to call this on election night.
The twin forces behind the Biden candidacy, the billionaires and the Bolsheviks.
Arizona, 19 million. For the vice president, 9 million, a little over 9 million for President Trump.
We are desperate for Donald Trump to not be president anymore because he's fascist and is a threat to our democracy. And we said that from day one. Yes, we want Biden to beat Trump. Is that clear enough?
It is increasingly difficult for the American public to get any sort of truth.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
People still don't know what the word feminist actually means. Not even that. People are still angered by the word.
People think feminist is a bad word, but it's not.
There are gradations, there are different waves. The people who are against gender equality love to use like militant feminists as the representatives of all feminists. It's untrue.
I don't know why you'd be threatened by strong women unless you were an incredibly weak man. If you don't have equal rights or you're not treated the same way, well, wouldn't you be angry?
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. More news, let's do it.
The right-wing culture war in the country continues to heat up, now with an effort to ban specific books, not from school curriculum, but from school libraries. And I want to be clear, these are books that are simply in school libraries. They're not assigned to students. They're just there in case students are interested and would like to read them. And wow, notably, most of the authors that they're banning from these school libraries happen to be Black. So let me give you the details. And by the way, this is happening across the country. This isn't in one specific state. So a children's book author and illustrator by the name of Jerry Craft apparently got a message from a school library saying that his books were being pulled from school libraries in Texas. The person who sent the message to Jerry Craft is from Katy, Texas, a town near Houston that has been under fire for attempts to limit the public's access to books that teach about racism. In October, the Katy Independent School District made headlines for temporarily yanking 2 of the author Jerry Craft's books, which tell the stories of Black boys who experience racism in schools, from school libraries and postponing his virtual visit. So here's what the books in question look like, and just the very existence of those books within the school libraries apparently really offend some parents to the point where no student is allowed to read them. Again, these books are not assigned. These are just books that are in the school library that have been pulled. Now, confused at what was happening to his books, he responded, to all of this on Twitter saying, let's take a look at his tweet. apparently I'm teaching critical race theory. Now, of course, critical race theory, which is graduate level curriculum, has nothing to do with his books, but critical race theory has been used as this like blanket criticism of anything that seeks to represent disenfranchised groups of people in this country, notably African Americans. And so it must be erased from these school libraries. And by the way, after significant backlash, I'm happy to report that a committee reviewed this ban and decided that the books were in fact appropriate, and they were reinstated despite the whiny parents' complaints. But we do have other examples, Cenk. For instance, Tiffany Jackson, the author of the 2018 novel Monday's Not Coming about missing girls of color, is in the throes of a similar controversy. At a school board meeting in London County, Virginia, parents demanded that her work be banned for alleged sexual content. In an email, Jackson, who is Black, said the book discusses friendship, dyslexia, community, healing, and just mentions sex, though it is not acted upon. Tiffany Jackson, the author, also says, quote, "It's hurtful to go through this, to be considered such a monster, allegedly corrupting children. I had to go back and reread my own book to determine if we're reading the same story. Monday is not about sex. Reading is fundamental, but context is everything. Thus, it's sad to see these schools and parents caught in a game of telephone." And before I get to other examples and more details about what's happening with these book bans, I want to go to the very last graphic here. Because while conservatives are fighting tooth and nail to ban books from school libraries, books that aren't even being assigned to students, they're also profiting off of this notion that they're the ones who are being censored. And my favorite example is the doofus, otherwise known as Dave Rubin, who literally wrote a book titled, "Don't Burn This Book." I got news for you, Dave. No one even read your book. No one cares. But my point is that while they're engaging in this censorship across the country, while they're banning books, burning books, they then turn around and make themselves victims of book burnings and book bannings. It's incredible stuff. Cenk.
Yeah, I think when you cancel a book, that would qualify as being part of cancel culture. But look, guys, we keep pointing that out because isn't it amazing that mainstream media never does? That they only look at it from a right-wing perspective, including people like Bill Maher, Joe Rogan, you name it. Whenever they talk about cancel culture, they only talk about it in the context of the left, when the right wing does it 10 times more. They're going around banning books all across the country, talking about as if they're against cancel culture. It hurts the brain to see how irrational, not just the right wing is, but the mainstream media is. They're like, oh, I can't tell. You can't tell anything. All right, now we told you guys what was gonna happen when all this critical race theory came up. We predicted that they were gonna start banning anything that had the Black perspective.
Yep.
Boom, here it is. It doesn't have anything to do with critical race theory. It barely has anything to do with racism. That's a Black author though, and talking about their perspective, well, we hate their perspective. We want to shut it down and cancel it. How dare you be Black and have your own perspective? You're supposed to have my perspective. They genuinely believe that. They genuinely believe, how dare a Black person speak for themselves? Don't you know you're supposed to just parrot what a white person says? They find nothing outrageous about that. No, we don't agree. We don't agree to be erased by you guys. And here we is all minorities. They tell me, oh, well, we wanted to ban all Muslims coming into the country. You're a Muslim who came into the country illegally. We wanted to ban you and wipe away your existence. Why aren't you okay with that? Well, no, I'm not okay with it. These authors are not okay with it. You guys are authoritarian people who love to censor things because you're fragile and you're also evil. That's what evil people do. They don't like democracies. They like to just grab power and shut down anyone that isn't in their camp.
And really, this is an effort to destroy actual, an actual exchange of ideas. Because libraries, I think library is a magical place where you get to go and anything that you want to explore, you get to explore it. If you have a curiosity, you get to, appease that curiosity and read whatever you want. That's the great thing about libraries. To ban specific books, this isn't even about like, oh, our kids are being forced to learn this or that. These are just books that they don't like. These are not part of any curriculum. They're just books, which, by the way, let's keep it real. Think about how many young children out there, whether they be Latino, whether they be Black, children who don't feel represented, who might feel like the outsiders because of how our society functions. These are the kinds of books that make them feel okay with who they are. They're books that represent their thoughts, their culture, and to ban that, why do these conservative parents get to be the arbiters of what all children are allowed to read? That's insane. It would be just as insane, by the way, Jake, just as insane if I went into a library and said, you know what? I don't like these pro-capitalist books. I want to ban them. I don't want any kid in this school district to read about capitalism in a positive light. That would be insane. That would be insane. I wouldn't do that because I don't get to be the arbiter of what everyone gets to learn. But no, these conservative parents, it's this sense of entitlement. It's a sense of entitlement that's been instilled in them since day one. The idea that they get to be the deciders. They're the ones that get to rule them all. They're the ones who get to decide what you read, how you read, what you think. It is in no way what this country is supposed to be about. And the very people, you're right, the very people who are always fear-mongering about censorship always ignore these stories. They're totally fine with these book bans as long as they're done by right-wingers. But hey, if you happen to be a transgender person who just wants to be respected and wants individuals to use the right pronoun when referring to you, oh my God, that is hardcore censorship, and that must be talked about day in, day out on a 3-hour daily podcast. It's pathetic.
I mean, look, the transgender issue is a good one because it's still totally acceptable to hate transgender people in mainstream media. So that's why the Rogans and the Mars and et cetera get to brag about it. And unfortunately, I hate it, but it's true. In this case, Dave Chappelle, et cetera. Oh, we're all so brave. We don't think you should exist. What the hell is brave about that? Oh, no, it's okay. I didn't. My beloved multi-million-dollar job didn't get canceled because you still don't have enough power. I could say that, hey, my existence is valid, but yours isn't. I don't want you people, my kids, to be taught that you're equal. Yuck. Okay, they're gross people. Everyone who says, by the way, no, we shouldn't have books about LGBTQ folks in the libraries either. We shouldn't teach it in the schools, et cetera. They're saying we think gay people are so bad, they're so immoral, they're so terrible that our kids shouldn't even know that they exist. That's how much they hate you. That's how much they want to wipe away your existence. And we're supposed to be okay with that. Well, I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with it. And Anna, to your point about their goddamn entitlement, which I'm so sick of. They say in Virginia, oh, parents want to do this, parents want to do that. Really? Did you ask Black parents? Did Black parents want to stop teaching racism and wipe away that part of American history? No. No, when you say parents, and by the way, this includes all of mainstream media, you mean white parents, you mean racist parents. You don't mean the rest of us. You don't mean Muslim, Black, gay parents. You don't mean any of that. You wipe away our existence. And then ironically, when anyone on our side fights back, you go, cancel culture. I can't believe you're trying to cancel poor Joe Rogan's $100 million contract. He's the victim, not all of you.
Just to give you guys a sense of how widespread this has become. The American Library Association said its Office for Intellectual Freedom reported 273 books were affected by censorship attempts in 2020, many with content that highlighted race, gender, and sexuality. Since September alone, September of 2021, there have been at least 230 challenges. So please come to me and tell me which side is engaging in real censorship, okay? Because this is the censorship that's ongoing, that does not get reported on, that you don't hear any real reporting on. You don't hear it in podcasts, you don't hear it in the mainstream press. And I'm sick of it because debates about what kind of language is suitable in conversations or what kind of labels are suitable when talking about people, that's one thing. But banning books that aren't even assigned to students in public education, that is a completely different level. And I just want the conservatives that we defended, the conservatives who were protested against on college campuses, to come out and speak out against this. We defended the right of those conservative speakers to speak and share their opinions in the free exchange of ideas on college campuses. But it's so interesting how that is a complete one-sided issue, because they won't come out and speak out against this censorship ever.
No, Anna, you could ask any of them, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Ann Cole, you could ask any of them. They're all cowards and liars. We actually have principles. We stand for freedom of speech no matter what, right? We defended all of them in their ability to speak, as no matter how much we hated what they said. When it comes to them, though, they're like, no, black people shouldn't be allowed to speak. How dare they write a book from their own perspective? Banish them. So, okay, you never meant any of it. You just used it for marketing so you can grab power and oppress others. Just say it, Ben. Just say it, Dave, Joe, Bill, all of you guys. Why don't you just say it? I love my money. I want to keep my money. And I hate other people. Hey, you're Muslim. You live in the gutter. I hate you. Blacks, just stop saying that we were racist when slavery wasn't racist. How dare you? Stop teaching it to our kids. Hey, black people, you must be forced to have a white racist perspective. No, we don't agree. And all of you liars and cowards can cry all you want. But real progressives, people on the left and Democrats, fight back. Do not listen to the media and do not listen to corporate Democratic politicians and our stupid leadership that always tells you to bow down to Republicans. No, fight Republicans. Fight for yourself, fight for your family. We exist. We have to, now we're back in the civil rights era, and we have to carry around some placards saying, I am a man. I'm not gonna take this crap from them. So whatever, they can have all their hurt feelings all day long. I don't care. Rogan, Shapiro, all of you guys, go cry and cry and cry. We're gonna fight you and we're gonna win.
Yeah, but fighting means actually organizing, because the right wing is organized, which is why they're able to accomplish these book bans. Fighting means showing up to those school board meetings and mitigating the damage that's being done by the well-funded right-wing movement. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, we have some pretty awful lies that Trump told during a recent rally in regard to coronavirus treatments and vaccines. And later in the show, we'll talk about hopefully some fun issues, including a white moderate tweeting against white moderates. Who is she? Why did she put that tweet out there? We'll give you those details and more.
Been at TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for like, political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning. Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote. And in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
Back on the Young Turks, Cenk, Anna, and Julia Ortega, who just joined by hitting the join button below on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, you can go to tyt.com/join. Without you guys, we can't get this raw truth telling out there. All you'll have is propaganda from corporate interests like the mainstream media, or propaganda from insane right wingers like Fox News. All right, Anna.
All right, let's get to our next story.
If you're white, you don't get the vaccine, or if you're white, you don't get therapeutics?
Well, that was Donald Trump in the latest twist on COVID-related disinformation. And remember, this is Trump who very recently changed his tune on vaccines, encouraging people to get vaccinated after spreading all sorts of disinformation that discouraged people from getting vaccinated. But this latest claim that he made during a rally in Florence, Arizona is definitely alarming, because he's putting out this notion that white Americans are being denied COVID treatment and even the COVID vaccine, when we have just spent an insane amount of time trying to convince everyone, especially including Trump supporters, to get vaccinated. Now, where does this all stem from? We'll get to that in just a moment. There is a tiny, tiny kernel of truth in his rant, but it is twisted in a way that is incredibly damaging and dangerous. But before we get to that, why don't we hear his statements in full context?
Even in America, we're witnessing cruelties that can be scarcely believed. They can't be believed. The left is now rationing life-saving therapeutics based on race, discriminating against and denigrating, just denigrating white people to determine who lives and who dies. If you're white, you don't get the vaccine, or if you're white, you don't get therapeutics. It's unbelievable to think this. And nobody wants this. Black people don't want it. White people don't want it. Nobody wants it. The Wall Street Journal described the practice race-based preferential COVID treatment. Said that's what it is. You get it based on race. In fact, in New York State, if you're white, you have to go to the back of the line to get medical help. Think of it. If you're white, you go right to the back of the line.
All right, man, his rhetoric is so dangerous, especially at a time when the country is already deeply divided, especially at a time when a huge portion of his supporters have answered in multiple polls that they think it's totally fine to use violence, political violence, to respond to what they think is democracy and the country being taken away from them. And before I get to the details of what spurred his comments, I just want to make a quick comment, Cenk, about the very clear setup behind him as he's making these statements. Like almost every single black supporter behind him is wearing a white shirt that says "Blacks for Trump 2024." It's kind of amazing. Anyway, that wasn't. I'm sorry, Blacks for Trump 2020.com, which a little outdated, but okay. But yeah, I mean, like, how do people see that and not notice that it was clearly like put in place? Like people were specifically put in place and told to wear very specific shirts. I mean, it's amazing.
No, but it works. It's good marketing, right? And I'm sure that if you go to that website, you'll find a lot of nonsense propaganda about how Trump is in favor of black people as they're going around the country trying to ban black authors. But people won't see that. They'll just see those shirts, they'll see the websites. So that part is unfortunately effective. And of course, Democrats would counter with, we think generally Republicans are right and we want them to be a stronger party. Literally, Pelosi and Biden said they want the Republicans to be stronger. Pathetic, absolutely pathetic. Okay, now to these really dangerous lies. Look, guys, if I thought white people were being put in the back of the line medically overall, I'd fight Democrats too. I think that was the most outrageous thing I'd ever heard. Being in favor of civil rights doesn't mean that minorities should oppress majorities. It means that everyone should have equal rights. Now, I know that offends Republicans because they want more rights than other people. And then what they do is they project their racism and their bigotry and their sense of entitlement onto the rest of us. And they say, oh, well, since we're evil people, we assume blacks and other minorities are also going to be evil. And if they get in charge, they're going to put us in the back of the line. So they're super ready for it because that's how they think. Right wingers think about power and putting their boot on the neck of others. They can't imagine that what we would actually want is equality and justice. So there is a portion of the story, as Anna's going to explain to you, that we disagree with. If they actually just told the truth about that part, we'd say, hey, that's a good point. Let's go make sure that doesn't happen, right? But they don't say that. Instead, they make up lies about how white people can't get vaccines and they're put in the back of the line. It's of course outrageous lies. But guys, if you're not a Trump supporter, you think, yeah, but everybody knows that's lies. No, his own supporters believe every word he says. Everyone who watched that speech on his side will now go repeat to all their family and friends, as if it's true, that white people are being denied medical coverage all across the country and told that they can't see a doctor before black people. That's what they're all going to believe because of that ass saying those outrageous lies.
I've been at TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring him. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
All right, so where do the lies stem from? I do think this was a misstep by health officials in New York, and I'll explain why in just a second. But here are the details. Trump distorted a New York policy that allows for race to be one consideration when dispensing oral antiviral treatments, which are in limited supply. The policy attempts to steer those treatments to people at the most risk of severe disease from the coronavirus. So I understand the thinking behind it, because usually, if like, let's say you are African American, if you're Latino, it is likely that due to social issues in the country, you're at higher risk of getting hospitalized or dying from COVID, okay? And so that was the thinking behind it. But I think in pushing for race to be one of the considerations, I think it kind of erases what the heart of the issue is, which is honestly socioeconomic status. That is a good indicator of whether or not you're going to be impacted the most by COVID. And the reason why you see African Americans and the Latino community overrepresented is because they're overrepresented in the lower socioeconomic status. And once you bring up race, this is what's going to happen. You're gonna have right-wingers, you're gonna have people who have an interest in dividing the country take this and twist it as some sort of like medical care apartheid when that is not what's happening here. Let me give you more details. So the opinion piece that Trump had referenced there was from the Wall Street Journal. The headline is New York's race-based preferential COVID treatments. New guidelines say whites may not be eligible for antibodies. The guidelines do not say that. And antivirals while non-whites are. Again, that commentary should not have been published because that is not the correct interpretation of what the health officials are pushing for in this policy in New York. So here are the guidelines in question. These are what the actual guidelines say. Oral antiviral treatment is authorized for patients who have mild to moderate COVID-19 symptoms. Patients cannot be hospitalized due to severe or critical COVID-19. Or have a medical condition or other factors that increase their risk for severe illness. Non-white race or Hispanic Latino ethnicity should be considered a risk factor as long-standing systemic health and social inequities have contributed to an increased risk of severe illness and death from COVID-19. So those two of the 5 eligibility requirements patients must meet to receive the antiviral medication. By the way, it's unlikely that you would even need the antiviral medication if you're fully vaccinated and boosted, because you won't get extremely sick from COVID should you get infected with it. And by the way, the COVID vaccine is readily available for anyone and anyone who's willing to get vaccinated. Like the idea that the vaccines are being withheld from white people is laughable. But let me give you more. The authors of the Wall Street Journal op-ed say that the guidelines neglect the relevance of economic status. And to be honest with you, I agree with that as well. That's the only thing I agree with in this Wall Street Journal op-ed. Researchers from Stanford's Department of Epidemiology and Population Health found a positive correlation between income inequality and county level COVID-19 cases and deaths in the US. Emory University researchers found a similar correlation with poverty levels. A racial lens on COVID disparities is inadequate. A broader lens that included class factors would be unlikely to suggest to public health officials that the Indian American CEOs of Alphabet and Microsoft ought to get priority over white Walmart clerks and hospital orderlies. And again, I tend to agree with that. And if you focus on the inequities as a result of socioeconomic status, that also prevents the twisting of this policy, which we just experienced with Donald Trump. And believe me, if you think this is the end of it, they're gonna be campaigning hard on this kind of messaging, which really hurts the country in many ways, including by further dividing it, leading to more political violence. And that's exactly what someone like Trump, a chaos agent, absolutely wants.
So look, like Anna, I know where it comes from. And so I'll give you one fact that particularly stands out, but it still is a bad idea. So from the Associated Press fact check, they explained the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have found late last year that Black, Hispanic, and indigenous people were about twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than non-Hispanic whites, and were notably more likely to be hospitalized. And part of the issue is people's different genetic makeup, but part of it is that they are less likely to receive outpatient antiviral treatment than whites. So there is a real issue here. And then it actually starts with not discrimination against whites, but discrimination against minorities and how they are treated by the medical community. But that's not the only issue here. So I understand why they're saying to doctors, et cetera, hey, remember, these folks are twice as likely to die. Keep that in mind. Please treat them with at least fairness and equality, right? But when you put a checkbox on a form And it seems like you're gonna treat individuals medically based on their race. That is a terrible idea. You should not open that Pandora's box. I don't think it's good at all. On the other hand, you could tell doctors, hey, listen, treat them as individuals. And if you're an individual who's African American and you have some certain risk factors, of course your doctor should keep that in mind. Of course they should be cognizant of that. By the way, if you're a white person with other risk factors, obviously your doctor should keep that in mind and make decisions accordingly. But it's not the right thing to even have race as a factor here, other than to make note of, please treat each race equally and fairly, etc. But one last piece of irony here, though, is that Trump telling his white right-wing audience, oh, they're trying to withhold a vaccine from you. Well, shouldn't they be thrilled? They don't want the vaccine. They've booed Trump in the past for saying he got vaccinated. So maybe there'll be good news. Oh, they're only giving it to black people and minorities and they're not giving it to white people? Yes, right? I mean, make up your mind. Which one are you gonna cry about? I know white people are right-wingers, not white people overall, are constantly victims and trying to figure out which direction to cry in, but make up your mind. And so, or maybe this is the one smart thing Trump is doing where he's trying to trick his own audience into getting vaccinated. Black people are withholding the vaccine from you. You should definitely go get it, right?
Not smart. That's not what he's doing.
And Anna, the only reason he might do that is maybe he's the one Republican politician that's figured out we're killing our own voters. This is not gonna help us in elections.
No, he loves chaos. He loves dividing the country. That's what this is about. That's it. End of story.
Okay, fair enough.
Dividing the country based on race has been his bread and butter from the very beginning, and he's gonna continue leaning into it. But we do have to take a break. When we come back, Hilary Clinton had a tweet about white moderates that you should know about. What did she have to say and what was the point? We've got that story and more when we come back.
Fan of TYT, I believe for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for like political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring him. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Let's do more news.
Let's do it. Politicians love to exploit MLK Day to push whatever agenda they might have. Either that or they just put out a simple tweet to at least make it seem like they're honoring the legacy of MLK. One example is Kyrsten Sinema, a conservative Democratic senator who has stood in the way of passage for major social spending bills that would actually improve our lives. She wrote, "Today we remember the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., hashtag MLK Day." Well, thank you for that, Senator Sinema. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind you all that Sinema is one of the Democratic senators who has refused to reform the legislative filibuster necessary to pass a voting rights bill. Wonder how MLK would feel about that. But she's not even the worst one in terms of these tweets. We've got one other person to bring up in just a second, but Cenk, I'd love to hear your brief comments on this.
Yeah, you can't block voting rights and then tell us a pretty little quote from Martin Luther King. By the way, note to all the people whitewashing Martin Luther King, he was an actual radical, a rebel. He fought for poor people, black people. He talked about the vicious racists in the South. And later I'm gonna get to his actual quote about white moderates, which is scathing and exactly applies to Kristen Sinema, who was the evil person who blocked voting rights just a couple of days ago.
Absolutely, and actually his quote about white moderates is one of my favorite quotes. And it would not only apply to Sinema, it would also apply to someone like Hilary Clinton, who also tweeted this. This is my favorite. MLK Jr. said, quote, "I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress." And then she says, this is a subtweet. Are you subtweeting yourself? Does she not know that she is exactly the kind of person that MLK was talking about in that tweet? She's the exact white moderate who has stood in the way of so many important policies from passing, including, Medicare for all or a single healthcare system that would be far better than the Affordable Care Act, which she fought for tooth and nail in the 2016 election. I mean, it's amazing. I think she's delusional. I think she thinks she's like a progressive or something. But anyway, what do you think, Cenk?
Yeah, no, when I first saw it, I was like, is this a deep fake? Have the Russians finally hacked into her account and decided that they're gonna put up absurd things that are like purposely insulting of Hilary Clinton from Hilary Clinton's account? I mean, you couldn't insult Hilary Clinton better than quoting Martin Luther King talking about white moderates blocking progress. But Anna, you're absolutely right. They're so clueless. In their version of the movie that's in their head, they're the hero. And Martin Luther King, if he was alive, he'd be like, oh, Hillary, way to not do universal health care. I mean, who needs voting rights, Hillary? I mean, look, the people that are really disgruntled are the bankers. You were so right to serve their interest, Hillary. I guess she believes that.
It's what MLK would have wanted. MLK would have wanted, our government to serve the bankers. That's what he was known for, very pro-banker.
Yeah, and that's why he put together the Poor People's Campaign.
Right.
Oh, wait. Hillary Clinton would have despised the Poor People's Campaign. She was, these radicals, they want change right now? No, we'll give you a little bit of change, and then 20 years later, you might or might not get more, right? So let me show you what Martin Luther King actually said. This is from the letter from a Birmingham jail. Now I'm gonna quote him verbatim. This is actually his actual words, okay? He said, first, I must confess that over the past few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his strive toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to their quote order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom.
Cenk, that quote, every time, I mean, I've read that quote so many times. Every time I read it, it gives me like, I can feel like the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because it's like, it's so powerful and it's so accurate and it's so relevant even today. It's such a powerful statement. I love it. Anyway, continue.
No, the last thing I was gonna say is, what you see the mainstream media saying, and I've now said it because so many times because it applied to me and it was such a perfect case of it. But the LA Times said we agree with Cenk's positions, but he's not civil enough. Because they wanted to maintain the order rather than seek justice. And forget me, 1,000 times forget me. But that's just an example of what they do to every progressive. Nina Turner fights back too much. Bernie Sanders fights back too much. We treasure our order more than we do justice. So the progressives who seek out justice are the bad guys, they tell all the voters. And the number one person who does that is Hilary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and honestly, Joe Biden, Joe Manchin, and Krista Sinema. They are exactly the white moderates. And look at that quote. He did not hesitate. Don't whitewash him. He said those white moderates are worse than the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah. So, Hillary Clinton, take a look in the mirror. You're the white moderate. You're standing in the way of progress. I mean, one final thing I'll say is, remember, it was just a few weeks ago where in an MSNBC interview or NBC interview, Hillary Clinton said that the Democratic Party needs to move away from progressivism and focus more on moderate policies. She said that. She knows who she is. Come on. Anyway, all right, let's move on to our next story. This is a fascinating story out of Florida, which has some good news and bad news.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day in high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring him. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
A Florida Republican who was defeated by 59 percentage points in a congressional special election refuses to concede. Now, this guy has definitely taken a page out of Trump's book. Let me give you the details of this race. Now, Sheila Sherflewis McCormick, a Democrat who pledged to fight for $1,000 monthly checks for Americans and who backs progressive policies such as the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, easily defeated the Republican in the race, Jason Mariner, to succeed Representative Alcee Hastings, who died in April. Now, with all the precincts reporting, she defeated Mariner, okay, 78.7% to 19.6% in Florida's 20th district, a 59.1 percentage point victory. She received 43,663 votes to her opponent's measly 10,883 votes. Okay, let's pause already because there's one quick note I want to make before we get to the clownish behavior of the loser here. It turns out that even in a red state like Florida, progressive policies tend to win because people want to experience economic stability. So remember that especially when you consider Florida overwhelmingly passed a $15 an hour minimum wage through a ballot initiative. So when we talk about states being red states or blue states, we always talk about it in the context of culture wars because that's what both parties are hyper-focused on. But if you actually run candidates who want to focus on economic justice, who want to actually do something for the workers in that state or in the country, they tend to do pretty well with the electorate. All right, so now let's get to Mariner. Mariner did not concede. He refuses to concede. In fact, he released a statement saying this: "Now they called the race. I did not win, so they say. But that does not mean that they lost either. It does not mean that we lost." No, it meant that you lost. You lost and you lost big, okay, big time. Mariner also said this. Well, he ripped a page out of Trump's book, so this will sound familiar to you all. Before the polls closed for the special election, Mariner filed a lawsuit alleging ballot issues in Broward and Palm Beach counties, the two populist Democratic-leaning jurisdictions that anchor the district. He also said, "And we'll also have some stuff coming out that we've recently discovered." Oh, okay, all right, Mike Lindell, Mr. Pillow Guy. I'm sure we'll see that evidence very, very soon. Cenk.
Yeah. So guys, this is a dangerous trend because now Republicans all across the country are saying it doesn't matter if we lost, it doesn't matter if we got annihilated. I mean, the guy got quadrupled the votes, and he's like, I don't care. I'm just going to try to destroy democracy because to them, they don't care about democracy at all. You'll see them. We've shown it to you already. You'll see a lot more. They keep using the talking point that America's not a democracy, it's a republic. It's warming up to fascism. So if you lose an election, who cares? Just call it illegitimate and try to grab power anyway. Because they hate this country. They hate democracy. They just want them. They wanted to use democracy when they thought it would help them keep power. When they were the majority and they thought that, well, we can beat up the minority and we'll maintain power that way. Now that democracy is not convenient for them, they're like, let's just destroy it. Who cares? So you'll see this a lot more because Republicans are cheaters and losers. And so, and they fundamentally hate this country. Now, I do want to mention one thing about this district. It's a very blue district, but remember, she also won the primary.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Okay. Now, why did she win the primary? You want to hear the great irony here? It's because there wasn't much media attention to it. If there was a lot of media attention to it, they would have lied about her because she's a progressive. They would have said, "Oh my God, do not help yourself. She wants to get you more money to the voters and help the voters and get them more health care." Oh, boo. But they forgot to smear her, so she won. Because if people find out what you're actually in favor of course the progressive's gonna win.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Cenk. She did win the primary. And as always, you bring the perspective about the media, which is definitely valid because the media did ignore this race. But while we're definitely critical of the Republican who clearly lost and refuses to concede, I do think it's important to also give you a statement from the Democratic primary contender who is very bitter that he lost and has blamed the winner here of doing something very, very wrong, wanting to represent the actual economic interests of the voters in this district. Democratic primary contender Dale Holness, a former Broward County commissioner, filed a lawsuit in November seeking to invalidate the Democratic primary results, alleging that Cherfilus McCormick's advocacy for universal basic income was tantamount to bribing voters.
Yeah.
It is a policy, and a policy that she would have to fight for and implement, but it's a policy. And isn't everything that every politician runs on considered a bribe when you think about it?
Yeah, no. And first of all, I had to read that quote twice because I was like, wait, is that the Republican or the Democrat?
No, it's the Democrat.
Oh no, that's the goddamn corporate Democrat who says, it's an outrage. He sued because she was planning to represent the voters. He's like, how dare she? She didn't even get permission from the corporate donors. This shouldn't be allowed. So this sumbitch takes corporate money, which are actual bribes.
Yeah.
Different companies give him money and say, do as we tell you, bitch. And he goes, that's not a bribe. That's not a bribe. And by the way, then when people like him, moderate Democrats, corporate Democrats, they get into office and then they give away trillions of dollars of taxpayer money to corporations. They just passed a $780 billion defense bill, the great majority of which is gonna go to defense contractors that bribe every single corporate politician, Democrats and Republicans alike. But he says that is not bribery. But God forbid you should do anything for your voters. He's like, well, that sounds like bribery to me. Amazing.
It really is amazing. It really is. I mean, these losers know how unpopular they are. And look, corporate Democrats, corporate Republicans, both sides would love nothing more than to game the system to their advantage, because neither one of them have actual policies that really improve the material conditions that Americans are dealing with today. And so, yeah, let me go after the progressive Democrat in this primary who's actually popular. And you're right, as he's collecting bribes from his corporate donors. It's really incredible stuff. All right, the bonus episode, guys, is gonna be fantastic today. So there is an extreme right winger on an extreme right wing platform who has referred to Trump supporters as deplorables. So who is it and why is he saying it? We'll talk about that in our members only bonus episode. And if you're not a member, don't worry, you can just click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube, or go to tyt.com/join to become a member. And we'll also talk about someone who is in the middle of getting rescued, but she needed to pause just to make sure she got the perfect selfie of the disastrous situation she put herself in. We've got that story and more. So become a member, tyt.com/join, or click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
The concept of the Young Turks means the audience, they are the Young Turks. They are the go-getters. They are the ones making the emphatic change happen in their local community. The reality is that we've always, young and the not so young, we've always cared about news. But when you do not see the messengers of the news look like you, when they do not share your experiences, exposures, and environment, and there's a disconnect between you and the news. I lecture in mass communications. One thing I tell all of my students, there is no such thing as non-biased news. It never has been. Non-biased news has always been an illusion. Let's go back to the 60s and 70s, where people would say that was the purity of non-biased news. News has a segment. That segment has a time. That time, you must do your story and be finished. That means the producer, the writer, the orator has to take out what they don't think is important and only leave in what they believe is important. They have a limited time to tell the story. They do not have time to tell everybody's version or everybody's side. And they get to choose the facts that they bring to you, as well as the nuance, which really is a word for opinion, that they bring to you, the context they bring to you. So we've always had a level of bias in news. Here's the issue. The issue is to not deceive individuals as if you don't have some level of opinion with your news commentary. And that's what TYT has never done. They've always been authentic in their approach to progressive ideology and their news analysis and political breakdown. And I think that's how you actually win the heart and soul of individuals who are consuming information from you, because now they see themselves in you.